The first snow of November dusted the clearing as Lyra hammered the last notch into another log. Her 3-year-old son Noah stood nearby, his small mittened hands, clutching a wooden stake like it was a treasure. "Mama, why round?" he asked for the 100th time, his breath making small clouds in the cold air. Lyra paused, wiping sawdust from her face, and smiled down at him. "Because circles are strong, Mijo, the strongest shape in nature. Mr. Silas says we're crazy." Lyra's smile faded. She looked across the snowy field toward the neighboring farm where Silas Vance and his wife Martha lived. Their traditional rectangular farmhouse stood solid and proper, smoke curling from its brick chimney. Just yesterday, Silas had driven his truck up to the clearing, shaken his head at her construction, and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Lady, I've been building in Kansas for 40 years. House is a square, that's how it's done. This round nonsense is gonna fall down first. We get harsh winds here." But Lyra kept building. She'd bought this 10-acre plot 6 months ago with the insurance money from David's death. Her husband had been gone 2 years now, killed in a construction accident in Wichita. The money wasn't much, but it was enough for land and materials if she did all the work herself. The real estate agent had tried to talk her out of it. "Ma'am, this is tornado country. You sure you want to build out here?" And without a contractor and in a circle, she'd been sure, more than sure. She'd spent months in the library researching, reading everything she could find about circular structures. The Mongolian yurts that withstood brutal winds, the Native American tipis designed to shed wind and weather the historical roundhouses of Europe that had stood for centuries. And most importantly, she'd read about wind dynamics, about how circular structures presented no corners for wind to catch how they distributed stress evenly, how aerodynamic design could make all the difference. Her plan was simple: a circular log cabin 24 feet in diameter built with her own hands. The logs were red cedar purchased from a mill 60 miles away and delivered in October. She'd spent weeks preparing the foundation, a circular concrete pad she'd poured herself, working in sections, following instructions from library books, and asking questions at the hardware store. The hardware store owner, Earl, had been skeptical but helpful. "I'll sell you the materials, but I think you're making a mistake. Round walls. How are you going to fit furniture? How are you going to hang cabinets? Lady, there's a reason houses are rectangular." But Lyra had her plans drawn out carefully on graph paper, dozens of detailed sketches showing every angle and measurement. The interior would be open concept with a central support beam and a conical roof that would distribute weight evenly across the circular walls. Curved cabinets could be built using bent plywood techniques she'd learned from boat-building manuals. Furniture could be arranged radially, creating natural flow and movement through the space. Every piece would have its place. Every corner, or rather, every curve, would be utilized efficiently. She'd calculated the square footage: 452 square feet of interior space, which was actually more usable than a rectangular cabin of similar dimensions, because there were no wasted corner spaces. It would work. She knew it would work. By early November, she laid the first courses of logs, creating a circular wall about 4 feet high. Each log had to be carefully notched and fitted the circle maintained with precise measurements from the center point. It was exhausting work. She'd rise before dawn, feed Noah breakfast, bundle him in winter clothes, and work until dark. Her hands were covered in calluses and splinters, her back ached constantly. But the wall was rising log by log, day by day. The neighbors thought she was insane. Martha Vance had come over with a casserole in October, a kind gesture wrapped in concern. "Lyra, honey, we're worried about you. This building project, it's too much for a woman alone. And this design, it's unusual. Have you thought about just buying a trailer home? They're affordable, and they're already built." Lyra had thanked her for the casserole but refused the advice. "I need to do this myself. I need to build something for Noah, something strong and permanent. I can't explain it, but I know this is right. The church ladies had gossiped. Lyra had overheard them after Sunday service. Poor thing, she's still grieving. Making bad decisions, that circular cabin idea is just desperate thinking. She'll realize her mistake when winter really hits and she's still living in that drafty construction site. The local contractor, a man named Dale, who'd built half the houses in the county, had actually stopped by to lecture her. Look, I respect your determination, but this is dangerous. You're not a builder. You're a widow with a kid trying to play construction worker, and this round design, it's not going to work. When tornado season comes, and it will come, that structure is going to come apart. You need corners for structural integrity. You need proper rectangular framing. This is foolishness. But Lyra had done her research. She knew that corners were actually weak points. She knew that wind hitting a flat wall created pressure that could tear a building apart. She knew that curved surfaces deflected wind, letting it flow around rather than pressing against. She just couldn't make anyone else believe it. Noah at least believed in her, or maybe he just believed in his mother, which amounted to the same thing. He was her constant companion, her little helper. He'd hand her tools, hold stakes steady, stack wood chips for kindling, and ask endless questions about why logs fit together the way they did. "Mama, will it be warm?" he asked. One particularly cold November morning as snow fell steadily. "Very warm," Lyra promised. "The round shape means heat won't get trapped in corners. It'll circulate better. And see how thick these logs are. They'll hold heat like a blanket." By December, the walls were up to 8 feet. Lyra had installed the door frame, an arched opening made from bent wood, and had begun framing the windows. She'd decided on small circular windows like portholes spaced evenly around the structure. They were unusual, but they fit the design and would provide plenty of light. The roof was the next challenge. She'd designed a conical roof, steep pitch to shed snow and rain, with a central support pole and radiating rafters. It would be covered in wooden shingles. She'd cut herself from cedar planks. Christmas came and went. They celebrated in the small trailer Lyra had parked on the property, the kind Dale had suggested she should just live in permanently. But Lyra knew the difference between temporary shelter and a real home. The trailer was cramped, cold, and depressing. The round cabin would be spacious, warm, and beautiful. She worked through January, through February, through March. The neighbors continued to mock. Silas Vance had started calling it the silo whenever he mentioned it. "How's the silo coming, Lyra?" "You planning to store grain in there?" His teenage son had been crueler, driving past with his friends and shouting, "Hey lady, your house looks like a UFO. When's it taking off?" But the structure was taking shape, beautifully. By April, the roof was complete. The windows were installed and Lyra had begun work on the interior. She'd built a central stone fireplace with a chimney that ran straight up through the center of the conical roof. Curved shelving lined the walls. She'd crafted a sleeping loft that followed the curve of the wall, accessible by a ladder. The kitchen would be compact but functional, with curved counters that followed the wall's arc. Noah, now 6 years old, loved exploring the space. He'd run in circles, laughing at how his footsteps echoed. He'd climb to the loft and pretend it was a ship's crow's nest. He'd help his mother sand the floors, a task that took weeks, because Lyra insisted on doing it by hand. By May, they moved in. The cabin wasn't completely finished. There were still details to complete, trim to install, a porch to build, but it was livable, and it was beautiful. The interior was warm and inviting, with golden cedar logs forming the circular walls. The windows let in light from all directions, and because they were evenly spaced, the light was balanced and soft. The fireplace radiated heat, efficiently warming the entire space evenly. The curved walls created a sense of flow and movement that Lyra found deeply satisfying. Noah had his own space in the loft where Lyra had built him a curved bookshelf and a bed that fit perfectly against the wall's arc. She had her bed on the main floor positioned near the fireplace. The kitchen was small but complete with curved counters and cabinets she'd built herself. Everything fit together like a puzzle, but the neighbors weren't impressed. The mockery continued, perhaps even intensified, now that they could see the finished product. "It looks like an oversized barrel," Martha Vance said to someone at church, not realizing Lyra was behind her. "I mean, it's well built, I'll give her that, but it's just so odd. And you know what they say when tornado season comes, and we always get at least one bad storm, that shape is going to catch the wind like a sail. I'm worried for that little boy." Dale, the contractor, had stopped by in June to inspect the work. He'd walked around the cabin twice, peered in the windows, knocked on the logs, and finally shaken his head. "I'll admit you built it solid better than I expected. But Lyra, you need to understand this design isn't tested. When a tornado comes through, and one will eventually, this circular structure is going to be a problem. You've got no basement, no storm shelter. You're going to need to come to my place, or the Vances when the sirens go off. Promise me you won't try to ride out a big storm in this thing." Lyra had promised nothing. She'd smiled politely and thanked him for his concern, but inside she was frustrated. Didn't any of these people do research? Didn't they know that the Pantheon in Rome had stood for 2,000 years with its circular design? That geodesic domes could withstand hurricane force winds? That aerodynamics favored curves over angles? But she kept her frustration to herself and continued improving the cabin. She built a circular porch that wrapped around the entire structure with a railing made from bent willow branches. She planted a garden in a spiral pattern radiating from the cabin. She installed rain gutters that followed the roof's curve. The cabin became a local curiosity. People would drive by slowly pointing and taking pictures. Some were just curious, but many were openly mocking. Lyra heard the whispers at the grocery store, the diner, the post office, the crazy widow in her roundhouse, that weird cabin that looks like a grain silo. Poor kid growing up in that oddity. Noah was aware of it too. Other kids at school would tease him about his weird house, but Lyra taught him to be proud of what they'd built. Unusual doesn't mean wrong, mijo. Different doesn't mean bad. We built something special, something strong. Let them laugh. We know the truth. Summer passed into fall. The cabin proved comfortable and efficient. The curved walls meant no dead spots for air circulation. The air outside was brutally cold with intense sub-zero temperatures, often dipping far below freezing, making the uninsulated rectangular homes drafty nightmares. The round design meant the morning sun hit the eastern windows. The afternoon sun warmed the southern side, and the evening light came from the west, a natural progression that made the day feel balanced and complete. But November brought the reminder that this was Kansas tornado country storm season, often preceded by dramatic, dangerously high winds, even outside of tornadic activity. The first severe weather watch came on a Tuesday evening. Lyra listened to the radio as the announcer described a storm system moving in from the west, conditions favorable for severe weather and possible tornado formation. Silas Vance called. "Lyra, this is serious. You and Noah need to come over here. We've got a proper deep basement insulated from the extreme cold. That cabin of yours, no offense, but it's not going to protect you if a tornado comes through." Lyra looked at her solid log walls, at the strong structure she'd built. "We'll be okay, Silas, but thank you. Lyra, don't be stupid. This isn't about pride. It's not about pride. It's about trust. I built this cabin to withstand storms. I know what I'm doing. The aerodynamic principle is sound curved surfaces allow high winds to flow around with minimal drag, unlike flat walls, which create intense pressure zones at corners. Silas had sighed in exasperation. Fine. But when that siren goes off, you better come running to my place. I'm serious, Lyra. I don't want to find you and that boy hurt because you were too stubborn to accept help. The storm that night had been intense but passed to the north. No tornado touched down in their area, but the incident started a conversation in the community. People began actively pressuring Lyra to accept that her cabin wouldn't survive a real tornado. The local emergency management coordinator had even stopped by. Ma'am, I understand you've built a unique structure here, but for safety purposes, I need to ask if you have a storm shelter plan. When tornado warnings are issued, where do you intend to take shelter? Here, Lyra had said simply, in my cabin. The coordinator had looked at her like she was suggesting they shelter in a tent. Ma'am, with all respect, this structure isn't rated for tornado safety. The circular design is unproven against high-level rotating winds, like an F3. You need to identify a safe location, a basement, a storm cellar, a designated shelter. I can provide you with a list of community shelters. I appreciate your concern, but we'll be staying here. He'd left, shaking his head, and Lyra knew he'd filed some kind of report marking her as a non-compliant resident or something similar. The mockery reached a peak that December when the local newspaper ran a feature on unusual architecture in the county. Lyra's cabin was included with a photo and a description that made it sound like a folly. Local widow builds circular log cabin despite expert warnings about structural unsoundness in tornado-prone region. The article quoted Dale the contractor. While the construction appears solid, the circular design is unproven and potentially dangerous in severe weather. Conventional rectangular construction has stood the test of time for good reason. Lyra had wanted to write a rebuttal to explain the aerodynamic principles, the load distribution, the historical precedents. But Noah had stopped her. Mama let them talk. Actions speak louder than words, right? That's what you always tell me. He was right. She filed the newspaper article away and continued living in her beautiful circular cabin. Winter passed. Spring arrived, and with spring came tornado season. April was unusually active. Several tornadoes touched down in neighboring counties. The Weather Service issued multiple watches and warnings. Each time, Silas Vance would call begging Lyra to bring Noah to their basement. Each time, Lyra politely declined, and then came May 14th. Lyra would remember that day for the rest of her life. It started normally enough. She'd worked in the garden in the morning, had lunch with Noah, and was preparing dinner when the radio announcers changed tone. A tornado watch has been issued for Cleveland, McLean, and Grady counties until 9 p.m. tonight. Conditions are extremely favorable for tornado development. A powerful storm system is moving through the area. Residents should be prepared to take shelter immediately if warnings are issued. Lyra checked her emergency supplies, made sure the flashlights worked, filled extra water containers. Noah watched with wide eyes, sensing his mother's seriousness. By late afternoon, the sky had turned an ominous green-gray. The air was heavy, oppressive. The wind outside, even before the tornado, was a constant howling threat pushing against the structure with brutal force. Birds had gone silent. Even the insects seemed to have disappeared. The phone rang. Silas Vance, of course. Lyra, this is it. This is the big one. I can feel it. You need to bring Noah here right now. I'm not asking. The sky looks bad. Really bad. Lyra looked out her window at the approaching storm. She could see the dark wall cloud, see the rotation beginning to form. Silas, we're staying here, but thank you. Make sure your family is safe. Lyra, goddammit, you're being crazy. That cabin is going to... She hung up gently. She couldn't argue with him now. She needed to focus on Noah, on staying calm, on trusting what she'd built. At 6 p.m., the sirens went off. The tornado warning had been issued. A funnel had been spotted on the ground moving northeast directly toward their area. Lyra gathered Noah close. "Remember what we talked about how strong this cabin is, about how the round shape lets wind flow around it." Noah nodded, trying to be brave, but she could feel him trembling. "We're going to be okay. Mama built this cabin to keep us safe." They sat in the center of the room, away from windows near the fireplace. Lyra held Noah tight, praying she was right, praying that all her research and planning and building would prove true. The wind began to increase, not gradually but suddenly, like someone had opened a door into hell. The howling was immediate and terrifying, a roar that sounded like a freight train, exactly like everyone always said. Lyra had read accounts of tornadoes heard survivors describe the sound, but nothing had prepared her for the reality of it. It was a living thing, this wind, a monster that wanted to devour everything in its path. The noise was so loud that she couldn't hear Noah crying, though she could feel his body shaking against hers. She pressed his face against her shoulder, trying to shield him from the terror of what was happening outside their walls. The cabin began to shake. Lyra felt the logs trembling against each other, felt the entire structure quivering under the assault of the wind, felt vibrations running through the floor beneath them. For a moment, just one terrible moment, she doubted. What if they were right? What if Silas and Dale and Martha and all the others had been correct all along? What if her circular cabin was just the folly everyone said it was? What if she'd built a death trap for herself and her son, based on theories she'd read in books, untested in the real world? The doubt was like ice in her stomach, cold and nauseating. She held Noah tighter and prayed harder than she'd ever prayed in her life. But then something remarkable happened. Through the windows, through the gaps around the door, Lyra could actually see the wind. Not the wind itself, but its effects. Debris flying past, leaves and branches and pieces of buildings swirling in a gray vortex. And as she watched in amazement, she could see how the wind was hitting the circular wall of the cabin and flowing around it, deflecting off the curved surface instead of pressing against it. The roar intensified. The cabin shook harder. Something heavy hit the roof, probably a branch, and Noah screamed. But the logs held. The walls stood firm. The circular design was doing exactly what Lyra had intended, presenting no flat surface for the wind to catch, no corners, where pressure could build, no weak points where the structure could be torn apart. And then the most incredible thing happened. Through the window, Lyra saw it, the funnel itself, a massive gray column connecting sky to earth. Debris swirling around its base like a skirt. It was perhaps a quarter-mile away, moving directly toward them. She held Noah tighter, preparing for the impact. But as she watched, the tornado's path began to curve. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but definitely, unmistakably it curved. The funnel, which had been heading straight for the cabin, bent its path, passing to their east by perhaps 300 yards. The wind was still terrible, still violent, but the core of the tornado, the part that destroyed everything it touched, missed them. It curved around them like water flowing around a stone in a stream. Lyra watched in awe as the tornado continued northeast, watched as it hit Silas Vance's property directly. She saw his barn explode into splinters, saw his tractor lifted and thrown, saw pieces of his roof torn away and scattered. But the tornado didn't hit the cabin. It went around. The storm lasted another 10 minutes, the wind gradually decreasing, the roar fading. When silence finally returned, Lyra and Noah sat in the center of their circular cabin, unharmed, surrounded by solid walls that hadn't budged. She opened the door carefully. The devastation outside was shocking. Trees were down everywhere, debris was scattered across the property. Her garden was destroyed, the spiral pattern obliterated. The porch railing was damaged, several willow branches torn away. But the cabin stood. Not a single log out of place, not a window, broken the conical roof intact, the structure solid. Within an hour, people began arriving. Silas Vance came first, his truck barely making it through the debris on the road. His face was white with shock. "Lyra, my God, I saw it. I saw the tornado curve around your place. I was in my basement watching through the window well, and I saw it. It was coming right for you, and then it just moved like your cabin was repelling it somehow." Other neighbors arrived equally shocked. Martha Vance was crying, hugging Lyra. "Your cabin is fine, completely fine. Our house lost half its roof. Dale's workshop is gone. The church lost its steeple. But your cabin, it's like the tornado avoided it on purpose." The local emergency coordinator arrived with his team. He walked around the cabin 3 times, examining it with professional scrutiny. Finally, he approached Lyra with something like respect in his eyes. "Ma'am, I owe you an apology. We all do. I don't know if it was the circular design or pure luck, but this structure performed better in that tornado than any conventional building in its path. I'm going to recommend that our office study this design. This could change how we think about storm-resistant construction." News crews arrived the next day. The story was too good not to cover. Circular cabin survives direct tornado path, while conventional buildings destroyed. Lyra was interviewed, photographed, filmed. She explained calmly about aerodynamics, about how circles deflect force. The wind hits the curve and splits flowing smoothly around instead of building up destructive pressure on a flat surface like a corner, about how indigenous peoples had known these principles for centuries. Dale, the contractor, came by a week later. His workshop was being rebuilt in a rectangular design naturally, but he was humble. "Lyra, I was wrong. Dead wrong. I've been building conventionally for 30 years. And I never questioned whether there might be a better way. Your cabin stood up to an F3 tornado. I've seen conventional houses I built myself completely destroyed by less. I don't understand the physics of how it worked, but I saw the result. I'm sorry, I doubted you." Silas Vance had become her biggest advocate. He'd lost his barn and a significant portion of his house, but his family had survived in their basement. "I watched that tornado curve around your place." He told anyone who would listen. "I've lived in Kansas my whole life, seen a dozen tornadoes, and I've never seen anything like it. That cabin changed the airflow somehow, redirected the wind." Lyra knew what she was doing all along, and we were too stubborn to listen. Universities sent researchers to study the cabin. Meteorologists came to interview Lyra and analyze the tornado's path. Architects came to measure and photograph the structure. Her circular cabin became famous, featured in journals and documentaries about innovative, storm-resistant design. But for Lyra, the validation wasn't really the point. She'd built the cabin because she believed in it, because she'd done the research and understood the principles, because she needed to create something strong and permanent for her son. The tornado had simply proven what she'd known all along. That summer, she finished the repairs to the porch and rebuilt her garden in its spiral pattern. Noah, now 7, helped plant the seeds. As they worked, he asked Mama, "Why did you really build it round?" "Was it just for the wind?" Lyra smiled. "That was part of it. But mostly I built it round because your father always said that life isn't linear. It's circular. Seasons come around again. Problems and solutions cycle. Joy and sorrow alternate. Building a circular home felt like honoring that truth." Plus, she added, ruffling his hair, "It's beautiful. And we deserved something beautiful." That fall, 3 other families in the area began building circular homes, consulting with Lyra on the design. She'd become an unlikely expert, sought after for her knowledge. But she always reminded people that she hadn't invented anything. She'd simply listened to centuries of human wisdom and applied basic physics. The following spring, another tornado touched down near their property. Lyra and Noah watched from their windows as it approached, watched as it once again seemed to deflect around the cabin, as if the building created some kind of aerodynamic shield. The wind was violent, the noise terrifying, but they were safe inside their circular walls. This time, no one called her crazy. No one suggested she should have built a conventional rectangular house. Instead, Silas Vance called after the storm to ask, "Lyra, would you consider helping me design a circular barn to replace the one I lost? I figure if the principle works for your house, it might work for me too." Years passed. Noah grew up in the circular cabin, bringing friends home who marveled at its unique design. Lyra continued to refine and improve the structure, adding features, experimenting with curved furniture designs, creating a home that was both functional and beautiful. She never remarried. She'd occasionally joke that she'd built the perfect relationship, a circular house that protected her required maintenance, but never talked back and deflected storms both literal and metaphorical. But the real joke was on everyone who'd mocked her. The widow who'd built a crazy circular cabin had proved that sometimes the unconventional answer is the right answer. That sometimes being different means being better. That sometimes the world needs people willing to build in circles while everyone else is thinking in squares. The cabin stood for decades, surviving storm after storm, season after season. It became a landmark, a tourist attraction, a symbol. But most importantly, it was home. Warm, safe, strong, and exactly what Lyra had intended it to be from the very first log. The neighbors had laughed when she built her cabin in a perfect circle. But the tornado had passed around it, and in doing so had proven what Lyra had known all along. Sometimes the strongest shape is the one that doesn't fight the wind, but lets it flow around, like water around a stone. Natural and inevitable, and perfectly designed.